2:10 p.m. A sun-drenched conference room on the 60th floor of Frankfurt's financial district. Helena Roth, the billionaire titan of Roth Capital, is conducting a little experiment. She invites the man repairing the Wi-Fi router to take a seat at the table of elites. The man is Daniel Hayes, a quiet single dad in a faded IT uniform. Helena smiles with sharp, calculated curiosity. "You look like you watch the markets, Daniel. Fine. Give me one piece of investment advice." Daniel looks at the data-heavy screens for exactly 5 seconds. Then, he speaks. Helena Roth suddenly stands up, her face turning pale. Daniel Hayes was 40 years old, and to the world of Frankfurt's high-finance giants, he was practically a phantom. He was a contract IT technician, the man who arrived with a toolbox to fix the invisible wires that kept the billionaires connected to their money. He wore a gray jumpsuit with a small name tag, and he carried the scent of cold coffee and server dust. But beneath the uniform was a mind that had once been one of the sharpest in London and New York. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., Daniel's day began not with market tickers, but with the scent of cinnamon oatmeal and the sound of a small voice asking for help with a hair tie. Daniel was a single dad, and his entire universe was centered on his 8-year-old daughter, Chloe. 5 years ago, he had walked away from a corner office overlooking Central Park, and a 7-figure salary after a family tragedy left him as Chloe's only guardian. He had realized then that a child cannot be raised by a nanny and a bank account. She needs a father who is actually there. He chose the life of a technician for its predictability, its silence, and its total lack of moral compromise. He didn't tell his new co-workers about his PhD in mathematics or his years at Goldman. He didn't want the spotlight. He just wanted to get home by 5 p.m. to hear about Chloe's day at school. He traded the roar of the trading floor for the gentle turn of a storybook page. Today, he was assigned to the headquarters of Roth Capital, the inner sanctum of European wealth. The atmosphere on the 60th floor was suffocatingly tense. Helena Roth, the CEO, was known throughout the industry as the Iron Empress. She was brilliant, incredibly wealthy, and deeply cynical about human nature. She had built her empire on the belief that everyone has a price and that most people are simply following the herd, too afraid to think for themselves. To her, the world was a chessboard where most people were just pawns waiting to be moved. As Daniel worked in the corner of the massive glass-walled boardroom, crouched behind a rack of servers, the directors were arguing over a massive new acquisition. They were looking to pour 10 billion euros into Aeon Green Power, a renewable energy conglomerate. The board members were blinded by flashy slide decks, government subsidies, and the allure of ESG branding. They talked about synergy and market dominance, their voices filled with the arrogance of people who had never known a day of physical labor. They saw a green future, but they were looking at it through lenses tinted by greed. Helena sat at the head of the table, her eyes bored as she listened to her senior VPs repeat the same tired talking points. She noticed the repairman in the corner. He wasn't working on the router anymore. He was standing perfectly still, staring at the live financial dashboard on the wall, a complex web of volatility indices and real-time trade flows that usually required a team of analysts to decipher. There was a stillness in him that was entirely out of place in this room of frantic ambition. Daniel wasn't looking at the pretty green lines. He was looking at the delta between the projected output and the logistical lead times. His eyes weren't those of a curious outsider. They were the cold, calculating eyes of a hunter analyzing a trail for signs of a trap. He saw a massive flaw in the data, a fundamental lie hidden in plain sight. He felt a familiar itch in his brain, the part of him that used to live for the kill. He tried to suppress it. He reminded himself, just fix the Wi-Fi, go home, pick up Chloe, make spaghetti. But Helena Roth had built her career on reading people. She saw the way his pupils dilated as he looked at the 200-day moving average. She saw the tension in his jaw. She saw a man who wasn't just looking at numbers, but judging them. "You've been looking at that screen for 10 minutes, Daniel," Helena said, her voice cutting through the chatter like a razor blade. The board members stopped talking. 50 heads turned toward the man in the jumpsuit. Daniel didn't startle. He turned slowly, holding a screwdriver in one hand and a tablet in the other, his expression carefully neutral. The data is interesting, Ms. Roth. Helena leaned back, a playful yet dangerous glint in her sharp blue eyes. Interesting? Most people just see flashing lights and confusion. You look like you're calculating a trajectory. Since you're so focused on our business, why don't you join us for a moment? Let's have some common man perspective. Daniel, give me one piece of investment advice. Consider it a tip for fixing the network. The board members looked at each other, some smirking, others clearly annoyed by the interruption. Marcus Thorne, a senior VP in a suit that cost more than Daniel's car, rolled his eyes. Helena, we have a timeline to meet. We don't have time for games with the help. I decide what we have time for, Marcus, Helena snapped, her gaze never leaving Daniel. Well, Daniel, we're waiting. What should Roth Capital do with 10 billion euros? Don't be shy. Daniel looked at the screens one last time. He saw the Aeon Green logo. He saw the supply chain variables. He knew that if he spoke, his quiet life might never be the same. He thought of his small apartment, the quiet evenings and the peace he had built. But the arrogance in the room was a physical weight, and the math, the pure, objective math, was screaming at him. He set his screwdriver down on the mahogany table with a deliberate clack. The room erupted in hushed, cruel laughter. Marcus Thorne leaned back, crossing his arms and checking his Patek Philippe. Let's see what the IT guy says. Maybe he thinks we should buy gold or put it all in a savings account. What's the word from the server room, Daniel? Any hot tips from the break room coffee machine? Maybe you've got a lead on some crypto scam? Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't look humiliated. He simply stood there, looking at the billionaire woman who had challenged him. The silence in the room stretched from an awkward joke into a heavy, expectant wait. Helena's smirk began to fade as she realized the man wasn't intimidated. He was actually considering the question with a level of seriousness that her own board members lacked. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, genuine curiosity about another person's thoughts. Well, Helena prompted, tapping a diamond-encrusted pen against the glass table. I'm waiting for your expert opinion. Or are you all talk like the rest of them? Daniel took a slow, deliberate step toward the table. He stood at the edge of the light, the shadow of the server rack still clinging to his uniform. Before I answer, do you want honesty, Ms. Roth? Or do you want politeness? Because in my experience, you can't afford both in this building. The question acted like a bucket of ice water on the room's collective ego. Politeness was the currency of the boardroom. Everyone lied to everyone else to keep the peace and protect their bonuses. Helena leaned forward, her interest fully piqued. Honesty, politeness is for people who can't afford the truth. Daniel nodded. He didn't ask for permission. He walked to the main projection screen and tapped a few buttons on his technician's tablet. He bypassed the security encryption on the dashboard, a feat that should have taken an hour, done in seconds, and pulled up a secondary raw data feed from the Baltic shipping sector. It was data that Helena's analysts had dismissed as a minor glitch in the morning briefing because it didn't fit their narrative. Everyone in this room is looking at the green energy projections, Daniel began. His voice had changed. The submissive tone of a contractor was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant authority. It was the voice of a man who had commanded the most aggressive trading floors in London, before some of the VPs in the room had even finished their MBAs. You're looking at the government subsidies and the carbon credits. You're trying to figure out how much you can make in the next quarter to please the shareholders. He paused, his eyes locking onto Helena's with an intensity that made her breath hitch. But you're investing in the wrong problem. You're chasing a ghost. Helena froze. She didn't blink. Behind her, Marcus Thorne started to stand up. Hey! Who told you that you could touch that? Quiet, Marcus. Sit down, Helena commanded, her voice a low, dangerous rumble. She turned her chair fully toward Daniel, ignoring the rest of her board. Explain yourself. Every word. Daniel didn't use jargon. He used the cold, hard logic of someone who understood how the world actually worked. Aeon Green Power isn't an energy play, Ms. Roth. It's a logistical liability masquerading as progress. If you look at the rare earth mineral lead times in the Baltic sector, which your analysts have smoothed out for the sake of the slide deck. You'll see a supply chain bottleneck that is physically impossible to resolve. The ships aren't moving because the raw ore doesn't exist at the volumes they've promised. He picked up a dry erase marker and drew a quick, brutal logic diagram on the glass wall of the boardroom. He traced the connection between energy prices, shipping delays, and interest rate hikes. It was a cascading failure model. You're assuming the subsidies will stay flat, Daniel continued, drawing a sharp downward arrow that seemed to slice through the board's optimism. But the political climate in Brussels is shifting. When the subsidies drop, and they will by Q3, the interest on Aeon's debt will exceed their entire revenue. They aren't building wind turbines, they're building a tower of cards. By Christmas, they'll be begging for a bailout, and you'll be the ones holding the bag. You aren't buying an asset, you're buying someone else's bankruptcy and calling it an investment. The directors looked at the screen, then at each other. Their faces turned from mockery to confusion, and then to sheer terror as they realized the logic was flawless. It was a mathematical trap they had all walked into. Marcus Thorne looked like he was about to vomit. "Who are you?" Helena asked, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at the diagram on the wall. It was a work of art, a piece of predictive modeling that few people in the world were capable of calculating in their heads, let alone on a glass wall with a marker. Daniel began to pack his tools back into his worn leather bag. He didn't look at the board. He checked his watch. It was 2:45 p.m. He had to be at the school gate in 40 minutes. "I'm the guy who fixes your Wi-Fi, Ms. Roth. And right, Geo, your Wi-Fi is fine. It's your strategy that's broken. Maybe next time, hire people who like the truth more than they like their luxury cars." He walked toward the door, leaving the billionaires staring at a gray jumpsuit disappearing into the hallway. The silence was heavier than the 10 billion euros they had almost lost. But as he reached the service elevator, he heard the frantic click of high heels on the marble floor. The boardroom was a disaster zone. Marcus Thorne was frantically calling the research department, demanding they re-verify the Baltic data, but his voice was shaking. Helena didn't care about Marcus anymore. She was standing in the hallway, blocking the service elevator doors with her hand. "Daniel!" she called out, her voice echoing in the sterile corridor. Daniel stopped, his thumb hovering over the down button. He turned slowly, the weight of his toolbox pulling at his shoulder. "I really have to go, Ms. Roth. My daughter is waiting at the school gate. I promised her we'd go to the library today." Helena ignored the comment about the daughter. She was staring at his face, searching her memory like a computer scanning a database. 10 years ago, there was a lead analyst at Sterling Hayes in London, a man named Daniel Hayes. He was the only person who predicted the 2014 energy collapse. He was called the Oracle of the S-Bahn because he lived in Frankfurt but worked the London markets. He was a ghost, a legend. And then, he just vanished. The industry said he was blacklisted. Some said he was dead. Others said he'd run off with a fortune. Daniel didn't deny it. He leaned against the elevator wall, his face tired. "I wasn't blacklisted, Ms. Roth. I walked away. There's a difference. People like you think everyone has a price. They're wrong. Some of us just have a limit." "Why?" Helena asked, taking a step closer, her voice losing its edge of command. "You were at the top. You were making tens of millions. You were the most powerful analyst in Europe. Why would a man with your mind choose to fix routers and crawl under desks in a jumpsuit?" "Because the firm I work for asked me to smooth out the data on a developing world debt bond," Daniel said, his voice quiet but filled with a hard, ancient anger. "They wanted to sell junk to pension funds. They wanted to rob grandmothers of their heat to buy bigger houses in the Hamptons. I said no. They tried to break me. They tried to ruin my name, but they couldn't. Then my wife died in a car accident while I was on a late-night conference call about a merger, and I realized that every second I spent in a suit was a second I was losing with the only thing that actually mattered." He looked down at his toolbox. "Chloe doesn't need an oracle for a father. She needs a dad who makes her lunch, helps her with her drawings, and doesn't smell like greed. I found peace in the wires, Helena. Wires don't lie. They either connect or they don't. They don't have hidden agendas." Helena was stunned, She had spent her entire adult life believing that power was the only goal worth chasing. She had surrounded herself with sycophants like Marcus, who only told her what she wanted to hear so they could get their seven-figure bonuses. And here was a man who had walked away from it all just to be a father. He was richer than she was in ways she had never even considered. He had a soul that wasn't for sale. Helena realized that his jumpsuit wasn't a sign of failure, but a badge of ultimate freedom. He was the only person in the building who truly owned his time. I checked that Baltic data just now on my phone, Helena said, her voice softening. You were right. My analysts had hidden the bottleneck in a footnote on page 400, buried in a PDF no one was supposed to read. If I had signed that merger, Roth Capital would have collapsed by next year. You just saved 10 billion euros, Daniel, and you saved my reputation. You saved everything. She reached into her blazer and pulled out a checkbook. Name your price. I'll pay you a finder's fee that will ensure Chloe never has to work a day in her life. Consider it a down payment on your future. Daniel looked at the checkbook and smiled, a sad, genuine smile. I don't want your money, Ms. Roth. I make enough to keep us happy. We have a roof, we have food, and we have each other. If you really want to thank me, do something about Aeon Green. Don't just walk away from the deal. Warn the pension funds. Don't let them sell that junk to people who can't afford to lose their savings. Use your power to do something honest for once. He stepped into the elevator. And maybe listen to the people who fix your Wi-Fi more often. They see the foundation of your building, not just the view from the top. They know where the leaks are. The elevator doors closed, leaving Helena Roth alone in the hallway. She looked at her reflection in the polished brass doors. She saw a billionaire who was suddenly feeling very poor, and a woman who was suddenly feeling very awake. Twist 1. Helena realized that Daniel hadn't just saved her money. He had helped her avoid a criminal conspiracy. The Aeon merger was a setup by her own VPs to liquidate their failing personal stakes before the crash. They were trying to sink her ship to save their lifeboats. Twist 2. Daniel revealed that the firm he had been asked to lie for years ago was the same bank that was now underwriting the Aeon merger. He hadn't just given advice. He was finishing a battle he had started a decade ago, protecting his city from the same predators who had tried to consume him. The fallout within Roth Capital was a bloodbath. Within 48 hours, Helena had fired the entire analytical team and the senior VPs associated with the Aeon deal. Marcus Thorne was escorted from the building by security in front of the whole staff, his $5,000 suit looking wrinkled and small. Helena realized that her company had become a house of mirrors, and she needed a new kind of glass. She didn't send a lawyer or a recruiter to find Daniel. She knew he'd ignore them. She went herself. She drove her own car, not the limo, to the modest apartment building in a quiet, leafy neighborhood where Daniel lived. She waited by the curb for 2 hours until she saw him walking home from the park with Chloe. They were laughing, Daniel carrying a bright pink backpack while Chloe told him a long, animated story about a bird she had seen. Helena stepped out of the car. She wasn't in her power suit. She was in a simple trench coat. She stood there in the cool evening air, feeling the grit of the city on her skin, and for the first time, it didn't feel dirty. It felt real. Daniel stopped, his expression cautious but not surprised. Chloe looked up at the stranger with wide, curious eyes. Ms. Roth, I thought we said everything that needed to be said. The Wi-Fi should be stable for months. I'm not here as the CEO of Roth Capital, Helena said, looking at Chloe and offering a small, nervous smile. I'm here as someone who finally realized they've been breathing recycled air for 20 years. I'm here to apologize. She reached out and handed Daniel a simple, handwritten envelope. It wasn't a contract. It was a personal invitation. I'm launching a new independent audit branch. It will be separate from the fund, separate from the board. No sales, no VPs, no bonuses based on deal flow. Just the truth. I want you to run it from home. No offices, no fixed hours. You can pick up Chloe every single day. I just need your eyes on the data. I need you to be my conscience. Daniel looked at the envelope, then at his daughter. Chloe squeezed his hand. Is she a friend from work, Daddy? She has nice eyes. She's someone I helped, sweetie, Daniel replied. He looked back at Helena. Why do this? You could hire 100 analysts who would work 18 hours a day for you and never complain. I don't need analysts, Daniel, Helena replied, her voice firm. I need a code whisperer. I need someone who remembers what it's like to fix things that are actually broken. I need your integrity more than I need your math. I need someone who can't be bought. Helena reached into her purse and handed him a personal business card, not a corporate one. It had her private number and a single word written on the back in her elegant handwriting. Respect. Daniel looked at the card, then at the woman who had once been the Iron Empress. Ask me to smooth out a line, or Haida, ask me to smooth out a line, or hide a risk, I'm gone. And I never work on Saturdays. Saturdays are for the zoo and the park. No exceptions. If you believe wisdom can come from unexpected places, type, I will live kindly. The act ends with a shared look of understanding. They weren't just business partners. They were two people who had finally found the value of the truth in a world built on profitable lies. 1 year later, Daniel Hayes is still a single dad. He still drives a modest car and lives in the same apartment, though he's added a nice new bookshelf for Chloe's growing collection of science books. The room in the back of his home has been converted into a high-tech analysis suite, filled with monitors and books on ethics. He is now the most feared and respected independent consultant in Europe. He doesn't take many clients, but when his Hayes report is released, the markets stop and listen. He is the man who speaks the truth to power. The world of finance, once a cold machine of pure numbers, began to develop a pulse. The Hayes effect wasn't just about avoiding bad deals. It was about reclaiming the human element in a digital age. The high finance world of Frankfurt had seen many legends, but none quite like the man who traded a corner office for a toolbox and a chance to be a hero to one little girl. Helena Roth's company has become a global model for transparent finance. She is no longer called the Iron Empress. Instead, she is known as the CEO who listens. She has implemented a Daniel Hayes rule in all her offices. Once a month, the senior executives must have lunch with the janitors, the security guards, and the junior IT staff. They must ask them what they see that the managers are missing. Helena learned that the people at the bottom of the pyramid often have the clearest view of the cracks in the foundation. She has become a champion for single parents in her workforce, providing on-site childcare and flexible hours, proving that empathy is the ultimate competitive advantage in the modern world. Daniel's daughter Chloe is now 9. She knows her father is important, but she still thinks his best skill is making grilled cheese sandwiches with the perfect golden crust. She cares that he's always there to tuck her in. She cares that when he talks to her, he isn't distracted by a glowing screen. To her, he's just dad, the smartest man in the world who knows how to fix anything. The final scene shows Daniel and Helena sitting on a park bench on a crisp autumn afternoon. Chloe is playing nearby with a group of children, her laughter ringing through the air. They aren't talking about billions or mergers or market volatility. They are talking about the book Daniel is currently reading to Chloe. The voiceover concludes as the sun sets over the Frankfurt skyline, the glass towers glowing like embers in the twilight. She asked a repairman for advice. She thought it was a game, a way to humiliate the board. But she found a mind she had almost overlooked because of a uniform. And one honest sentence didn't just save a company from ruin. It reminded a billionaire that her soul was worth more than her portfolio. True wisdom doesn't always wear a three-piece suit. Sometimes it carries a toolbox and a pink backpack. And the best investment you will ever make is in the people who have the courage to tell you the truth, even when it costs them everything. If stories like this inspire you, subscribe to Chip Healing Stories. We tell the ones that shouldn't be forgotten.